Molo, General.
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm okay.
Isebenza ebusuku lana izigorilla
Molo Nhlengele.
work at night.
Molo Nhlengele.
Isebenza ngobusuku. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you, my God.
Good evening, colleagues. Am I audible?
Good evening.
Yes, you are. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you so much. Oh, good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Deputy Minister.
Chair, good evening, and colleagues, good evening. Good evening.
Good, thanks, and welcome, DM.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm just a fly on the wall.
I know. We've invited you, the minister, and other generals to be a fly on the wall tonight. No, thank you very much for accepting the invitation under those conditions. Thanks. I just want to acknowledge the presence of Lieutenant General Yam, Lieutenant General Mbata. Lieutenant General Mbata is the Chief of Staff of the South African Defence Force. Lieutenant General Mbata is the Chief of the Army. Lieutenant General Msimanga is the Chief of the Air Force. Major General Ramazwana, planner in the SANDF, and Major General Mapaha, acting Surgeon General, and Brigadier General Gardner, planner in the South African Defence Force. Also seen General Masondo, the military ombud, General Mokwapa, understand is also on the platform, and the retired, I think it's Brigadier Gel Demonde from the Defense Reserves. But I will be getting my list updated so that I acknowledge all our invited guests to this symposium this evening. The program for today is just a mini symposium that the committee on the Joint Standing Committee on Defense decided to host tonight, starting from now, and then accordingly invited about 3 presenters. Just to mention the names of those presenters for tonight is Professor Lindy Heineken and Dr. Moses Kanye and Mr. Helmut Romer Heitman. So those are the 3 external speakers for tonight. Yes. See, for me, colleagues, and my colleagues on the Joint Standing Committee, in other words, for us, the critical issues for this evening are the following. The Defense Review made an observation that that suggests that the Defense Force is in a critical state of decline. So that observation was made and is in this book that is before me. Secondly, that the DoD, the Department of Defense, has raised concerns about inadequate funding, which has led to the continued deterioration of its abilities, and that there are limited funds now available for defense, and the defense force is overspending on its compensation of employees, starting to crowd out its ability to spend on equipment, technology, and operations. And critically, there is no money to fund modernization of the SANDF equipment. It's been mentioned in our meetings, and that the force is aging and top heavy, though there is no 100% unanimity on it being top heavy, and but I will mention it because it's been mentioned in the past. And that force rejuvenation is required not only to save money, but also to bring down the median age of the force. Fit for purpose SANDF, that is what we require. And there was also a point raised at our last meeting that possibly we need to reduce reliance on a total workforce of 75,000 members in the regular force. And that then brought us to the question or the topics for today, the force design. The force structure, stroke force level, gives us 75,000 members that we are being told about. Currently, we have dropped below 75,000 due to natural attrition. But the Defense Force wants to maintain a strength of 75,000 members. Now, we then said, no, the current fiscal environment constrains us to live within our means. There is no money. The current budget is not well. And if one looks at the current fiscal economic outlook, the economy is not going to improve anytime soon, and the projected revenue is likely to decline. So says the Minister of Finance and SARS, and it means that the deficit, the budget deficit, is going to widen as we move forward. So very soon we'll have to, all departments must then review their budget and start to effect cost-saving measures. So this department is one of the departments that Treasury will be coming back to it to ask it to cut down on its spending, on its spending, as it were. So with that, we should invite the external experts on the issues of force design, and they've written extensively in those in that area. Amongst us, we have Dr. Moses Kanye. He serves as a non-executive director at AMSCO, a managing director at Mashups College, an external supervisor at UNISA Graduate School of Business. And last time when we had a colloquium on civil-military relations, that was in early last year, he was one of the panelists. We've also invited Mr. Helmut Romer Eidman. He has written and lectured on defense since 1978. He played a background part in developing the 1996 South African white paper on defense. He also participated in the 1998 Defense Review and served on the Defense Review Committee from 2011 to 2013. And we've invited Professor Lindy Henneken. She too has written extensively. There is one book that I would recommend to you colleagues. I will get the title of that book. That is his latest release. So she too has written extensively. Yes, she too was in the colloquium that we had last year. So I will, as I call up each speaker, just summarize a brief resume of each presenter. Yes. Maybe let me take this as a complete resume, because these are known individuals in our community. So I will, without wasting time, let me invite our committee assistant to beam the program for today. Because these are known. I invite the program to be beamed for today. So without wasting time, let me invite our committee assistant to. And it looks as though it is taking time. Whilst we're still doing that, let me invite. Let me invite Professor Henneken to present the problem statement as she understands it, after which we'll then call Dr. Moses Kanye to reflect on the problem statement, and then later, after him, Mr. Helmut Romer Edman to do the same thing. And I would also invite Lindy, Professor Lindy Henneken back to then give her additional views and also reflect on the matters that the other two colleagues would have presented to us. And once that has happened, I will then open it up for questions and comments. I'm sorry that I'm actually limiting it to the members of the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, and but the Deputy Minister is in the House, and I will give exception to him. I may have to give exception to some members of the Defense Force, but I'm trying to manage time, but we'll see how the senior management in the Defense Force, but we'll see how it goes. Professor Lindy Henneken, may I invite you to come forward, please, to him and do the honors. I may have to give exception to some members of the Defence Force, but in trying to manage time, but we'll see how the senior management in the Defence Force, but we'll see how it goes.
Prof, you're still muted. Prof, you're still muted.
Henneken, may I invite you? Oh, yes, you're muted. You're not audible.
That often happens. I just want to start off by saying that I feel very honored to be invited to this event, and that I feel quite intimidated by all our distinguished guests here tonight, all the generals watching, exactly what is going to be revealed in this discussion. I also want to say that I'm a sociologist, so I look at military issues from a different perspective. I look at militaries from how society affects the military and how the military affects society. And because I've only got 10 minutes, and I hope that someone can put up my presentation. I know if maybe I know Wilhelm is in the room. I don't know if he can flash it up. May just make things easier as I go through the presentation. But I will while we're waiting for it to come up. And I hope that someone can put up my presentation. I think it might be coming up. Yes. I know if maybe. I thought I would start by saying that when we think about the force design and structure and related problems, it's important to recognize where we began, in 1994, and in order to understand where the Defence Force finds itself in today. In 1994, the military faced a dual challenge of moving from a conscript to an all-volunteer force, at the same time having to integrate 7 different armed forces. And following this, there was massive downscaling, demobilization, organizational restructuring as the military moved to an all-volunteer force. And at the same time, the Defence Force had to manage 4 different processes, and people sometimes forget this. It underwent 4 different transformations: organizational transformation, which is what we're speaking about mainly tonight, but political transformation, cultural transformation, as well as human resource transformation. And these were all very complex processes, and I capture them quite accurately, I hope, and in a very balanced way in my book, South Africa's Post-Apartheid Military Lost in Transition and Transformation. But this is not the purposes of this discussion. I want to briefly sketch why we ended up with a skewed personnel, operational, and capital budget, which is one of the most pressing challenges, of course, facing the SANDF, especially given the current fiscal constraints. And the question before us is, what changes in the SANDF's force design is required to bring about the desired balance between personnel and personnel, operations, and capital? And in my presentation, I see that you still haven't been able to bring it up. I will quickly see if I can share my screen.
Colleagues, Willem, Dr. Janssen van Rensburg, is there a challenge on your side to put it up, or a committee assistant?
Chair, it's Willem speaking. I'll beam it up quickly, no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. I will, because I know we're under time pressure at this time of the evening, I'll continue. Oh, great. So we can move on to my first slide there, Wilhelm. So one of the major challenges facing all volunteer forces is finding the right balance between full-time professionals, civilian specialists, and reservists. So what I want to say here is that the SANDF is not the only military that grapples with these challenges. And South Africa followed the typical flexible force structure in trying to find the desired functional and numerical flexibility to meet priorities spelled out in the Constitution, and also to meet shifting mission demands. And this is one of the first challenges, is that the force design and structure did not enable the Defence Force in this way, not in terms of the different functions, nor in terms of it having the reserve capacity to expand. So this, just for those who do not know, the flexible service system consisted of the long-term service system, the medium-term service, and the short-term systems. And the short-term system was meant to feed into the reserves in times of need. And this planned ratio, according to which the force was then designed, was 40% short-term service, medium-term, 14% medium-term service, and 20% long-term service. And due to various interpretations and the implementation of the flexible service system and the impact of integration, I don't know whose mic is making a noise in the background there, we ended up with an unbalanced force where approximately 87% of members ended up in the medium or extended long-term service tenure bracket. So this becomes very problematic because
sorry, my apologies, Prof. Mzwanele Mnyonso, honorable member, your mic is, please, can you mute your, Mzwanele, can you mute your mic, please? Thank you. My apologies, Prof. Over to you.
No problem. So already by 2003, the Defence Force had reached a crisis in this regard. With the majority of the members, it almost had the reverse. It ended up with 20% then in the short-term service, and most of them in the medium to long-term service, which of course had an impact on career planning and force development strategy. So a further consequence was that there was insufficient throughput of young fit personnel to the part-time force component, and due to this, the structure was sort of revised, but not much, and we saw the introduction of the military skills development system as an attempt to rejuvenate all these issues that you raised previously. In terms of aging force, and not insufficient reserves, this was the attempt to bring it down. But the problem with this, and I've done quite a lot of research on this, that there wasn't an appropriate exit mechanism, either for the short term or for the medium term, and the same applies to the same applies to the MSDSs at present. So you see a massive climb in personnel costs, which of course have a negative impact on capital and operational expenditure. Other contributors, and I think that if one wants to look at the current strategies, there should be some debate about what can be effective exit mechanisms, and I've got some ideas around this. But other contributing factors which led to these imbalances, in terms, according to the Defence Review, a higher personnel recruitment. There was an increase in labour costs. There was also the requirement of government to fill vacant posts. So it was not just something that the Defence Force wanted to do, that was the political pressure there. And the retention of people in posts who were no longer fit for the post profile. The other factor was, of course, the increases in improvement of pay and service conditions that were not budgeted for. The effect of this long-term effect of the strategic defence packages. Other contributing factors, which you also mentioned, Mr. Tabo, earlier on, was the high ratio of general officers to other ranks. Also because of this rank inflation that was taking place, and that we see that there was because there wasn't this proper planning in terms, and too many people in the medium and long-term service. We get rank inflation and the ability to reduce the number of persons serving in the full-time forces through rationalization and the right sizing of the forces. And next slide, please, Malalam. So against this background, the challenge before us is now, how do we address the misalignment of the SANDF force design and structure. The first is that the SANDF cannot, if we can have the next slide up, it'll be great. The first is that the SANDF cannot address, the one just before that. The SANDF cannot address force design issues, which includes personnel as one component, without clear guidelines from politicians and society on what they want from their defense force, or if they want a defense force as all. So points for discussion today before us that we need to consider and that I hope our specialists will address is what missions and roles should be prioritized given the current allocation of resources. Without a clear understanding of the SANDF's role, one cannot design, plan, train, or resource the defense force for the right mission sets. In this regard, there seems to be no alignment between what the SANDF believes its roles and missions should be and what government and the public believe the role should be. And this is the first point that needs to be addressed and deliberated. So what exactly do we want from our defense force? And there needs to be really robust debate on this issue. The next issue then is to realign, once you've established that, that's your first point of departure, is then to realign the force design to deal with operational demands. This will involve major organizational restructuring to rejuvenate. But first, we need to establish in what way the current force design and structure is falling short of optimal efficiency. Not all is bad in the defense force. A lot is working well, but where are the capability gaps? So that's what we need to do. Where is the capability deficits, and that's what I wanted to point out here. Then the next big issue is how to modernize the SANDF to perform these functions given the current constraints. Clearly, this is not just about personnel issues, but how can one use technology as a force multiplier? I ask the question, do we need paratroopers, or do we need more paratroopers, or do we need more data analysis? Are there posts for data analysis? We need more intelligence. That's great, but who's going to actually analyze that intelligence so that it can be operationalized? So those are the type of issues. Then once the SANDF needs to address the challenges the other one is to address the challenges that pertain to the human capital management, the person post fit and career management. Without this, the Defence Force will not be able to attract or retain skilled workforce, nor have the appropriate exit mechanisms. If it doesn't manage its personnel properly, it's going to continue to sit with the situation that it is in today, especially those who are in the short and medium-term contracts. The next, there needs to be a better management of the operational tempo in terms of the scale of training, deployment, and the use of resources. The SANDF cannot be used for everything. Every time there is a crisis, this is what has contributed to its current state of decline. The military is not a push-button organization. It needs long-term planning, vision, restructuring, and there needs to be real hard decisions in terms of what the Defence Force is meant to do for us here in South Africa, not only locally, but also globally and in the region. In this regard, there needs to be a better, also, what is also important and I'm picking up on the issues in the literature and what I've seen is there needs to be better internal control mechanisms to enforce standards related to the use as well as the overuse of resources, both equipment and personnel. Another important point is how to grow the reserve component to address capability gaps rather than using contractors. And if we've got time, and it's not my role here to introduce a problem statement, but there are various options in terms of how one can increase the reserve component in a very constructive way to benefit society and the military. Last is what is termed basing in the literature, and this is the need to realign and close bases. This is a difficult task, and should there and there needs to, but before you can even start thinking about closing bases and functions, there has to be an agreement on the force design and structure. So perhaps we can have the last slide now. So this kind of, we need to move from conceptualization, from vision to action. And this little diagram sums it up quite nicely in terms of what I've just described, in terms of roles and missions and the force design and the need to communicate with various stakeholders. Because if this doesn't take place, it'll be impossible to modernize, it'll be impossible to address the issues that human capital management pose, to address the operational tempo, to make sure that there's sufficient internal controls, the whole issue of what functions should be closed and not, what bases should be remained open or not, and also in terms of the reserve force component utilization. These are not easy questions, but they need to be addressed and debated. The SANDF is standing on the precipice of yet another major organizational transformation. The current crisis makes this a perfect time to reset the force design and structure processes in order to transform it for the future. We need to think, should we not have a reactionary and a constabulary force more suited to meet the cyber threats and internal domestic threats that we face? So this is my opening brief. I hope this very brief, succinct summary will engender some good discussion, and I look forward to what the experts have to say and to hear your views on this matter. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for these introductory remarks, basically painting what we can consider as a problem statement, but I'm not too sure if the other members of the panelists agree with you. Let me invite them in that order. I'm not going to come in between them. I start with Dr. Kanye. Dr. Kanye, can you unmute your mic? I'm sure you'd also want to be assisted with your presentation. Dr. Jans van Resbeck, may you please put it up, Dr. Kanye's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chair, and to Professor Henneken for the presentation. Indeed, this topic is quite a hot potato for everybody, and we really appreciate the fact that you have taken time to enable us to discuss the matter, especially under the circumstances when everybody is battling with the pandemic. We really appreciate that. If we can move to the next slide. The purpose of my presentation is basically to provide some input on matters that are relating to the Defense Forces force structure and the force design. Next. And I'm hoping to do this by first providing the broader conceptual context so that we are all aligned in terms of what it is that we are dealing with. Because my understanding is that if there is no general or consensus on the concepts that we are dealing with, we might just misdiagnose and therefore misprescribe. So conceptual context is very important. Then I will move on to deal with the force structure determinants, which I believe are very important in this discussion. Then we'll go to the imperatives, the turnaround imperatives, some points to ponder, and then allow for discussion as the chairperson will allow. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, some of the concepts, Chair, that I believe some of us tend to confuse one way or another, not because of whatever, but simply because they are used interchangeably in normal discourses and in some literature as well. But unfortunately, for this particular platform, it is important that we make a clear distinction in terms of what is it that we are talking about when we refer to force structure and what it is that we refer when we refer to force design. Because this also has got an impact on institutional mandate and competencies. There are things that Parliament may do or not do in respect of both of these, or the level of competence, in terms of making an impact for the Defence Force or to interrogate various aspects of the force structure. So that conceptual understanding is very important. But Chair, let me submit that my input is going to focus on force structure. The reason being the fact that all the questions that we have asked in the problem statement, they seem to relate very much more to force structure than to force design. And I will explain why I'm saying this. And obviously, all of us are asking ourselves a question: how did we get here in the first place? Why is the HR budget running away from us? What is it that can be done about it? How long can we sustain this? Now, in answering these questions, we are actually enabling ourselves to prevent the recurrence of this situation. Because if we don't deal with it now, things are just going to get worse and worse. Now, if you look at the distinction between the two, as provided by the Defense Review Chair, the force design deals primarily with those components of the force within the water defense force structure which can or may be mobilized for operational deployment, or which directly support defense operations. When it comes to the structure, it is everything else, everything. So if the force design is part of the force structure. Now, if you take an analogy of a soccer team, I don't know if the chair is familiar with soccer, but generally the big bosses, the board will allow the team to have X number of players, but not all of them will be playing. Some of them will be in reserve. Some of them will be just backup. So if the board allows for 30 players to be in that soccer team, it does not prescribe to the coach as to the configuration. In other words, who needs to go to the field of play on a particular day and that kind of stuff. Now, the role of the coach could be the equivalent of the commander of the SANDF who designs the force or the force itself. In other words, he decides on the kind of equipment that is required, the kind of troops that specializations of troops that will be required at the bases and capabilities and so on. That would be the force design. In fact, as a matter of interest, Chair, during the defense review process, after long deliberations, we decided that it was not going to be ideal for us to prescribe to the commander, to the chief of the SANDF in terms of what the force design should look like. At best, what we could do, and which we eventually did, was to provide guidelines, broad guidelines that they can use for purposes of force design. But most of the effort went into force structure deliberations. Next slide, please. So that is why my focus is primarily on force structure. I believe, Chair, and Professor Henneken has already indicated some of these. There are determinants that sort of guide the country as to what kind of force structure it should have. The first one is it revolves around the mandate. Does it have a broad mandate or a narrow mandate? I'm going to get back to that. What is the nature of threat perception? The immediacy and agency associated with it. If it is going to be something is going to be happening soon, you are likely to be dealing with higher levels of force structure. The complexity, the quantity, and quality. Part of this, Professor Henneken has already indicated. Are you going to have more paratroopers or are you going to have more data analysts? So that talks to the specializations requirement that we might have. The next determinant is how much financial resources are dedicated to this to the defense function. In most cases, there is, which is normally overlooked, the national disposition towards the military. This is very crucial, and I'm going to get back to this. The geopolitical considerations are also one of the determinants for force structure, and lastly, political will. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the mandate of the SANDF on a continuum of narrow to broad mandate, where narrow is more basic developmental initiatives that the country might engage in, like supporting the police, disaster support, border security, things about just prestige, ceremony, and things like that. Whereas when it comes to a broad mandate, as the Defense Force has, you're dealing with developmental state initiatives, you're dealing with operational deployment in the form of peace missions, and actually preparing for any war situation, which means you're actually dealing with a much broader family of requirements for the national defense. The only exclusions in the case of South Africa is issues of nuclear warfare and space warfare. So, but as things stand, it is quite broad enough for it to be funded at a certain level for purposes of operational efficacy. Next slide, please. Now, the second determinant, which I've already alluded to, is the issue of threat perception. The higher the threat perception, it makes sense that force levels will invariably be higher. When you look at Pakistan, India, no-brainer because of the environment that they are living in. But what we in South Africa have had to deal with is the issue of what kind of threats are we dealing with, and what kind of manpower is required in order to deal with them. In fact, if you look at the defense review, in our deliberations during the defense review, we consciously moved away from a threat-based solution package for the defense review, because we understood that some people understood threat in the form of conventional warfare and so on. But obviously, history has shown us that we are living in a dangerous neighborhood. So there is a direct correlation between threat perception and force levels. Next slide, please. Financial resources. Now, this is the one that we are all grappling with. You know, the Defense Review proposed that a 40-30-30 split should be maintained. For every rand that is spent on defense, only 40 cents will go to HR-related matters. But as you know, that has not been the case up until now. Where, if you look at the ideal graph relationship between financial resources and force level, look at the red line there. That's the idea. So as the financial resources or financial allocation increases, then we can experiment more, we can accommodate more in terms of people that we get out on board. But unfortunately, the reality is that the budget allocation has been declining precipitously over the last couple of years. We're sitting at less than 1% of the GDP as we speak today. And whereas the current force levels are pointing up north. So there is a funding gap, a huge delta that needs to be addressed. In fact, if you look at the Defense Review, the idea or the projections were that by sometime in 2025, 26, we would have renormalized to 40-30-30 split, but that is highly unlikely. Next slide, please. Now, I've already mentioned the issue of national disposition towards the military. Professor Neken has already mentioned it as well, that we need to have a national consensus on the need for the military. Well, if there is no such consensus, then it becomes a bit difficult to fund it. Now, how do you capture the national consensus? It will be in the form of policy documents such as the white paper on defense and the Defense Review, because in putting these documents together, a lot of consultation happens, like the last Defense Review showed us. But once that national consensus has been captured in these documents, now these have to be backed up by adequate financial allocation, which will make whatever commitments that we are captured in that document can materialize. Now, the issue of geopolitical considerations can also not be underestimated, because for a very long time we believe that there are no threats. We are in a very peaceful neighborhood, and so on. But guess what? South Africa gets called in now and then to intervene here and there to quell some fires here in Africa, and most of these are not planned. They are not in budget. So that means we need to think differently in terms of our involvement in the region. And Chair, as a matter of interest, you might have seen what is happening out there at a global level, where you find that the dominant superpowers of the past are being rattled by the emergence of new major powers who are making them much more restless. Now, take that situation and juxtapose it on our continent here. For a very long time, we have thought of South Africa as a great regional power that is capable of doing X, Y, and Z. But guess what? When you look at the investments that it has been doing, especially with regard to the Defense Force in the recent past, if you look at the decision-making processes that have been in relation to where we get involved and how we get involved, you can see that there is a disconnect. At the same time, our neighbors are striking big, major, major partnerships, buying big weapons. In no time, our status as a dominant regional power is going to evaporate, or we're going to drift into obscurity, and we will become just a shadow of our former selves. Now, it can only happen if we do not apply our minds with regard to the funding and issue of force structures. The last one, which might be a bit awkward to discuss in this forum, is the issue of political will. Because it is one thing to say we need to get involved in Africa, we need to go and help out our brothers and sisters up north, and yet there is no funding that comes in the to back up that commitment. The issue of making very hard and politically unpalatable decisions in respect of Defense Force personnel is another one, because if there is no political will to take such decisions, it makes it a bit tricky. Next slide, please. Now, Chair, obviously, this whole discussion that we are delving into today has got to do with we have to do the job, and how much we can afford to fund such personnel. For one to be able to intervene, one needs to understand the dynamics of force structure planning. At a very simplistic level, Chair. People come in, people operate, and people go out. So that cradle to grave type of life cycle. So there is recruitment that comes in one way or another. In our case, we have MSDS, which Professor Haneke has already alluded to. There's lateral transfers, there is normal recruitment. And then you get the guys within the organization, and these people, once they are in the organization, they are categorized, or they are placed in, say, 4 categories for purposes of utilization. They come in and they do preparation. So they go through all sorts of training, and they prepare for mobilization, and then they get deployed to wherever, internally or externally. When they come back after deployment, they go on leave, they rest a bit, and others go on individual training because they have to do compliance training at individual level as well. But at the same time, you have those that are in reserve in order to replenish those that are in deployment. So that means you're basically dealing with those 4 categories within the environment. And then at some point, they will have to exit. Now they can exit via some form of attrition, whether it is death or retirement or terminations or whatever. Now, Chair, this picture I thought I should show because in respect of oversight, it is important to understand how the National Defense Force operates so that you can make the necessary interventions and make the necessary interrogations. Let's move to the next slide, please. Now, for us to get out of this conundrum, there's basically 3 things that might have to be considered. If there are 4, I don't know, but these are the 3 major ones. The first one, personnel has to be reduced. Okay. Now, the reduction of personnel can happen through natural or forced attrition, severance packages, and so on. If we still have supernumeraries, in other words, people that are not sitting at specific approved posts, then we might have to look into that. We proposed in the defense review that the number of supernumeraries should never be more than 2% of the total establishment table of the defense force. Chair, if we are still sitting with long-term suspensions with pay, where people go or they are suspended for whatever reason, and obviously South Africa is a constitutional country, is a constitutional democracy. Now, if you have long-term suspensions with pay, and we're still complaining about budgets, something is wrong somewhere there. For example, in 2018, 2019, we had 30 people who were suspended for an average of 338 days at 10.7 million rand. Now, that's quite a number, both in terms of costs associated with that, the duration of such suspension. Now, I don't understand why would the justice, the wheels of justice roll and turn so slowly within the defense environment, because they have a dedicated military justice system. So that would be the first intervention. The second one, we might have to look at reducing deployment. All right. Now, the more you deploy, the more you have to spend. Okay. Now, obviously, there are normal deployments and there are ordered deployments. Now, the ordered deployments, we're proposing that those should be pre-funded, because if they are pre-funded, it means, therefore, that the budget, the normal budget, the operating budget, the HR budget, and capital budget will continue to function and be spent as planned. And then the ordered deployments are pre-funded, and therefore it's not eating into the broader cake of the set cake, the fixed cake that is allocated to the department. And then the last one, which is very important, is the rebalancing of the budget. I think, Chair, there has to be a concerted effort for all the services to rebalance the budget from an HR point of view, and especially now that we've got this pandemic, everybody is revisiting their resource allocations and planning and associated budgets. Therefore, it is ideal that it's opportune time for all of us to press the reset button and rebalance our budget, take those decisions. Next slide, please. Now, I know that, Chair, from the point of view of Parliament, they are interested in getting to know how can we support them in their oversight function. I think, Chair, these points are worth looking into. The first one being the fact that we need a model that the department uses for structure planning. That has to be adopted. It has to be structured such that it is acceptable to everybody, and then it gets adopted, and then we implement it for consistency. Now, if you look at forces around the world, those that are even much more complex than we are, they have models that are using for force structure planning to ensure that there is efficacy. They don't have budget overruns, and they're doing that quite well, simply because they had a consensus on the model that they're going to use. When they need to change and tweak things around, they can do that on the basis of a mutually agreed force structure planning model. So I believe one of the key interventions that we need to consider is to have some kind of force structure planning model that applies to our National Defense Force. And there are many of them. There are many of them, and we can make use of the ones that have got, in terms of complexity, that might be appropriate for us. Chair, the second point is, I would imagine that when and do monitoring, there are certain things that you want to look for, certain questions that you want to ask, and you want solid answers on them. Now, there are critical things that I think that can serve as good indicators of whether we are on track or off track. Once we get out of this conundrum that we're in at the moment, we don't want to get back into it again. So therefore, I believe we need to have certain performance matrices that we put in place, some kind of ratios, just like you will do in business. You know, things like return on investment, return on equity, debt to equity ratio, and things like that. What is it that we can use for purposes of assessing the performance of our national defense? The first one, obviously, is the budgetary metrics. The 40-30-30 is going to be very difficult at initial stages, but obviously, as time goes on, as we progress, the budget is sort of going in the direction of 40-30-30 somehow. Then it gives something is happening, at least from the point of view of oversight. It is something to consider. The second thing, Chair, is the ratios between support and combat. We know that, well, at some point, you know, for every troop deployed, you had 4 others that are behind it, supporting it. Now, is that still true as we speak today, or this 4-to-1 is now 8-to-1 or 10-to-1? If it is 10-to-1, obviously there's something wrong, you know? So that number, the ratios between support and combat is very important. Now, within the combat environment, how many of those are deployable vis-a-vis those that are non-deployable? If you have a majority that is non-deployable, it means already you're sitting with a problem. So that is not talking to a force design issue. It's talking to the efficacy of the force structure at any given point in time. Then the next aspect, Chair, is the recruitment versus attrition. In other words, here you're counterbalancing the inbound personnel vis-a-vis outbound. Now, if you are getting more people in and yet no people are going out, you are definitely going to have a problem somewhere down the line. So it is an important number to track. And then the last one is senior personnel versus rank and file. How many generals, how many troops are there for one general in the country? You know, So you can't have a general over generals, so you need to have a very balanced and healthy ratio between senior management vis-a-vis rank and file. The next point is, which already touched on, is accelerated exit of unfit, overage, unhealthy, or supernumerary personnel. Something needs to happen in that space where people are unfit for an extended period of time and cannot be used in either combat or support. Something needs to happen. Where you have personnel that are overage, simply just by looking at the time in rank, vis-a-vis age, that should give an indication that something is not right. Unhealthy ones need to be looked into, not in an inhumane fashion, but in a very organized, humane, and structured fashion. Supernumeraries, then there has to be a policy determination on, firstly, the ceiling for supernumeraries and how they get dealt with, and within which time. You can't have supernumeraries for 10 years. Then it means there's something wrong from a business point of view. Something is just not right there. Then the other aspect, Chair, we're asking, how did we get here in the first place? How did we get our budget to run away, HR budget to run away? That we have to dabble into our operate into our capital budget in order to take care of operational requirements. How did we get here? I think, Chair, one intervention is to make sure that in the performance agreements of all senior personnel, there should be milestones for rebalancing the HR numbers and the HR budget. Now, if you're saying that the Navy is supposed to have 20,000 tops and 95% deployable capacity, and is sitting at a number that is not aligned to that, then so will it be the case. So will it be the case with regard to the Army, to SAMS, and to the Air Force at various levels. Now, what that does is that it makes sure that senior leaders are accountable for capacity that they have under their control and how it is deployed. Next slide, please. Chair, that concludes my input with regards to the conundrum that we are facing. Hoping it makes sense. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Doc. It did make a lot of sense. I will now invite Dr. Helm. Hey, let me just go back. Okay, please, Doc, you may come in. Is Dr. Helmut Romer Heitmann. His presentation was also transmitted to us. May I ask it be beamed up, please? Janse van Rensburg, Doc, may you do it, please?
All right, I hope you can hear me. I'm not muted, at least yes. I hope I'm not.
Yes, no, you are audible.
Thanks. I did send some other stuff through as well, but I'll just talk through this one quickly. I think maybe you had a chance to look at the other things too. A lot of these points have been covered by the Prof and by Dr. Kanye, so I'll run through it fairly quickly. I think a key problem, there goes the slide. I don't know where it's gone, but anyway, I hope you can still see the slide. Now,
Yes.
a key problem is that peacetime, it's exceedingly difficult to decide what sort of defense force you need. You don't have an obvious enemy to plan for. You don't know what you're going to deal with. The other problem is that threats can materialize very quickly and can escalate very quickly. If you think back to the Falklands War of 1982, if you think of Kuwait's invasion, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 91, and a couple other things, the war in the DRC, the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea that broke out very suddenly, the Russian annexation of Crimea, these things happen very quickly, and they happen a hell of a lot more quickly than you can build or rebuild a defense force. So what most countries try to do, and a key word is try, is to develop and maintain forces that are adequate and appropriate to deal with the threats they can identify, whether already exist or they can predict them, and then with a built-in adaptability, flexibility, and agility to deal with unexpected threats. Agility in this case being mainly the mental agility on the part of senior commanders and staff officers. Some countries, Indonesia, for instance, refer to this as a minimum required force. I think if we have the next slide, please. If you think about it, if you look at the defense force, any defense force should have the strength to execute any existing missions, deal with any existing challenges that may turn into a mission, deal with existing threats that haven't yet become active, and foreseeable threats, and then foreseeable risks. And then that'll define your personnel strength for the combat services, and the rest must follow, or flow from that. If we look at the SANDF today, and I'll come back to it right at the end, it is actually too weak to meet that standard. We are short of combat units, we're short of deployable personnel, we have key capability gaps. The most obvious capability gap is the lack of any effective maritime patrol aircraft. Flying maritime patrol with a 1943 vintage Dakota with a weather radar in it and a pair of binoculars is not effective. So we have a key problem there. Next slide, please. The other thing is we always say that, well, a lot of people say the defense force is overstaffed, is overstrength, etc. In fact, it isn't really. If you consider, if you really add it all together, yes, a little bit, but not much. What is wrong is the ratio of total personnel to personnel in combat units. That is out by comparison with other countries. But the real problem isn't so much that the personnel budget has grown, which it has, particularly when the salaries of the junior ranks were increased quite dramatically. But really the defense force is caught between an ever-lowering ceiling of funding on the one hand, and the personnel costs where you do have to give inflation-related salary increases, and you can't get rid of people, and that squeezes things. And then you have operational costs that come in that were not expected, not budgeted for. And I think Dr. Kanye mentioned a thing there, and in the defense review, we put in a thing arguing for an operational employment budget, which is exactly what he touched on. And there the defense force also will need to learn, well, the Defense Department needs to go to Treasury to get that implemented, seeing as everybody up to and including the presidency and parliament agreed to it. But then the defense force will learn to need to say no. For instance, if government says, right, send a battalion to XYZ country, then the defense force needs to turn around and say, okay, the incremental cost, the additional cost will be so many 100 million per year, put it in our budget or in our account and we'll go, otherwise we're not going there. Or, as happened to the poor Navy, right, you're now going to have to patrol the Mozambique Channel. Well, that went way over the planned sea days. Ideally, what the Navy should have done said, okay, the additional cost per year is so much, put it into our account and we'll go, otherwise the ship stays at home. We need to start thinking hard in that way. In this case, the defense force is often its own worst enemy. Every time it gets another job that's over and above, somehow it manages to pull a rabbit out of the hat and do the job and do it well. And then people turn around and say, oh, well, obviously they don't need more money, they can still do the job, not realizing we're cutting it into muscle and bone. Okay, the problem, this mismatch between what we want them to do and the ever-shrinking budget is then aggravated by the fact that we have a lot of personnel in junior ranks who are way over age for their rank. Now, not only are they unfit, much like myself, but they also are expensive. You know, a corporal, for instance, should be 19 and living at home with mommy or living with a girlfriend or living in barracks. He shouldn't be 45 with a wife and 3 kids. Nothing wrong with me having a wife and 3 kids at age 45, but he shouldn't be a corporal. That makes them horribly expensive. Problem there is, of course, we can't just toss them on the street. It'd be neither practical nor moral. We then have, I would argue, in the defense force, too many administrative and management bodies that are overstaffed, that are overranked, and actually don't do very much except irritate the combat services. If you look at the number of general and flag officers and equivalent civilian officials in the Department of Defense and the Defense Force, only about 80 of the 400 odd are in the 3 combat services. All the rest are in headquarters, military health service, logistics, personnel, etc. Do we really need that many there? I would think not. And then we need to look at rank inflation. Now, this is something that predates the SANDF. This started in the SADF. If I take just one example, way back in the mid-70s, the head of military intelligence was a brigadier, not even a brigadier general. Today it's lieutenant general. Now in this particular case, I think maybe it should be a lieutenant general, but none of that gives an indication of the rank inflation. To be fair, we have not matched the rank inflation of the police, who went really way out. But nonetheless, there has been rank inflation. There is overranking. Next slide, please. We then look at that formula, that 40-30-30 formula. It's very unfortunate that was put in the defense review because it's not really anchored in any reality. Any defense force you look at will have a different ratio, and the ratio is not set to some formula. You can develop a formula over time, but even that's not that relevant. It depends entirely on the nature of the defense force. That in turn depends on its mission sets. It depends on the geography it works in. For instance, a defense force that is very army heavy, as we are, and infantry heavy, as we are, for good reasons, is going to have a higher personnel cost than one is focused mainly on Air Force and Navy. That's inevitable. You can't change that. And to lend some perspective there, I looked at all the NATO militaries. Only 5 of them spend 40% or less on personnel. That includes 2 that still have conscription, which is inherently the cheapest way to have personnel. 4 others spend more than 70% of the allocation on personnel. And that includes Belgium, Greece, and Portugal. And Belgium in particular is a very high-tech, technology-intensive defense force compared to us. So I'll come back to it again. I don't think we're spending too much on personnel, not vastly too much. What happens is simply the budget is too low. And there is a difference there. Next slide, please. Having said that we're not overstaffed, just we can have that next slide. Oh, there we are. We can probably today cut about 10,000 posts without doing any immediate harm. But it will have to be done very, very carefully if we don't want to get in the way of some future expansion if risks increase, because you might wind up kicking out the wrong people. For instance, your choice is there. What is it? The easiest way is to not bring new people in. Yeah, but then you lose youngsters. Then the age problem gets worse. The other one is to get rid of the old guys, but then you lose a lot of experience and expertise and the institutional memory. So it's a careful balancing act. If we actually wanted to fit into that magical formula, we would have to shed somewhere between 20 and 25,000 posts, and we would cripple operational capability. There's no 2 ways around that. It's not doable, given the mission set that the Defense Force has today. We then also need to think, in terms of current labor legislation, can we just kick these people out? It's certainly not going to be cheap. We have to give them some sort of decent settlement or pension. Do we really want another 10 or 20,000 unemployed in the country? And again, who do you kick out? Now, particularly if you look at the overage, overweight guys in junior ranks, I may be wrong, but I think, and at the time certainly when we discussed this, it was the case, and I think it still is, a lot of them are former members of the non-statutory forces. They went into exile for a cause, they missed out on education. Without that education, they're not promotable. Can we morally just say, okay, cheers, nice having you, go away and live on some teeny pension and quietly starve to death? We can't do it. So it's not going to be a cheap, easy, quick solution to this problem. Next slide, please. If we look at internal things, there is actually not a heck of a lot the Defense Force can do, particularly given this problem of how to shed overage personnel. It's something we can do, but it's going to be either costly or take a lot of time. Wait them. For instance, a couple of years back, Treasury offered the Defense Department R1 billion, if I recall correctly, for severance packages. And a lot of people were delighted. I'm afraid I rained on that party. I said, fine, R1 billion will buy us a 5,000 Rand a month annuity for 1,000 people. So we'll have 1,000 people living in poverty, and we'll have 9,000 or 10,000 people that we should have gotten rid of still in the system. It does nothing for us. But that gives an indication of the cost involved. So yes, we need to shed the overage personnel, but how are we going to do it? We can wait for them to retire, which is a problem. We can pass them to other government services, which is done in other countries, for instance, in India. The Prussians used to have a system. After 20 years, you were guaranteed a civil service post, usually one that suited an older person. But of course, government is trying to reduce the public service bill. And I might just interject something there. I'm not one of those who agrees that our public service is too large. If you look at our public service, it's too small. We don't have enough soldiers, policemen, nurses, primary school teachers, etc. We may have too many DGs and DDGs and chief directors. But the reality is, while the public service may be too large for the economy at the moment, it is not too large for the country. We need to understand that before we do damage to ourselves. We do need to reverse rank inflation, and that we should be doing anyway. And that will bring the cost down. Not immediately. You can't go to a colonel and say, congratulations, you're now a lieutenant colonel. You have to wait till he gets transferred, and the new guy comes in and saying, it's now a lieutenant colonel post. But that can be done. And we can definitely reduce and downrank the administrative overhead structures, which we should do anyway. Now, looking at that, I personally don't think there should be 5 or maybe 6 3-star posts in the Defence Force. And if you look at the Army, the corps directors, as in Director Armour, Director Infantry, etc., those are the officers who do the doctrine development. They look into new equipment projects, they oversee training, they oversee the posting and career management of junior ranks, etc. They were always colonels. Then came this magic Project Optimum and that stuff in '98, and suddenly they all became brigadier generals, overseeing much smaller organizations than before. Where, for instance, in the Armour Directorate, you had a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, sometimes a major or 2 captains, and then a couple of warrant officers. Now you have a brigadier general with 5 or 6 colonels and a whole tribe of other officers under them, doing exactly the same job those few officers used to do before. In fact, less, because there's less of an armored corps. So we need to think hard about that. A lot of the personnel and logistic functions should be decentralized back to the combat services. This is again a thing inherited from the old Defence Force. They were centralized, the ranks were driven up, and the actual ability to perform those functions went down. Personnel management and career planning deteriorated sharply from when it was done by the services and the branches or corps within the services to when it was done centrally. And the same thing happened, by the way, with pay. Everybody got paid on time, the right amount, when pay was done at unit level. Then it was centralized, and I, for one, am still waiting for some salary from 1983, but I'm not holding my breath. And then, do we really need an independent health service? We used to have a medical corps run by a brigadier, and the Navy and the Air Force had specialists, and they did their hospital time in hospitals that the Army ran. Then we established again in the old Defence Force the medical service, then called now the Military Health Service. And suddenly, magically, there was a Lieutenant General, 3 or 4 Major Generals, and. Has medical support to the Defence Force actually gotten any better? I don't think it has. And that's got nothing to do with transformation. It didn't get any better at that time either. Next slide, please. And I'll come back to force design just now. But looking at the key questions that were raised in the letter you sent me, sir, looking at the aging combat services. Now, it is partly, and Prof. Heineken touched on this, an issue of exit mechanisms, and it's partly an issue also of the current levels of high unemployment. Why would anybody leave a job if he's not got a job to go to? This is a thing to bear in mind. And there's, again, not going to be a quick, cheap way to solve this. We can look at some things over time. We do obviously need to shed the overage junior ranks by some means. We'll have to see about it. We should think in terms of replacing the MSDS and the current short service, medium service type system with a short service system that we couple directly to vocational training. So you take an unemployable youngster off the street, you put him or her, for argument's sake, 6 years full-time service, and then 4 years in the reserve with maybe 2 months a year or even 3 months a year, but linked to a vocational training bursary. And they come out at the end. Now, whether they come out fitters and turners, welders or cake icers or flower design rangers, I don't really care. Whatever they want to do. Or a different one might be 4 years in a deployable battalion that can do peacekeeping work, etc. Then 4 years doing border protection where they have time to do part-time vocational training, and then a 2-year bursary with reserve service. The advantage there too is if you look after the people well, a good proportion of them will stay on to give you your core of NCOs, for instance, in the reserve units. At the medium service level, we need to look at a more attractive exit system. An example I would say there is if you look at the US military, after 20 years, you can go out on half pay for life. Now, 20 years, you're about 40, more or less. You've probably done, I think most of the generals will probably agree with me if that are listening to us now. After 20 years in, you've done about 90% of what is fun, unless you're really lucky. You're basically most of the time you wind up driving a desk and being bored mindless. In our case, you have to hang in like grim death because you can't really afford to leave. So shouldn't we think something like that? Isn't it a lot cheaper to let the guy go at half pay than to keep him forever when we don't really want him and he doesn't want to stay? We need to think about those things. Just touching briefly on the reserves as well. A reserve system, a volunteer reserve system, at the moment only works because we have unemployment. If you really want to make it work, you need to look at the Britain-American examples. You need a perk system, a small pension, negotiate with banks and others for better interest rates, things like that. Then they can do it. And an American officer once explained to me, he says, you recruit the man, but you retain the family. So you can recruit the guy because, let's be honest, a lot of us as young men like playing with fancy equipment, going out there playing soldiers and getting paid for it. But then you get married and you have kids, and then you have to explain to the wife why you go away 1 weekend a week. 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, or whatever the routine is. If you can go to the wife, or these days, of course, the husband, and say, yes, but there's going to be a pension at the end of it. We can buy from the commissary as you can in the American military. We get better HP rates, we get better insurance rates. That makes it viable. Something to think about. Then to rank inflation. We are not as overranked as we sometimes assume. I've looked at the SANDF compared to other militaries. We're slightly overranked in the combat services. And not just general officers, but throughout. We're slightly more officers to soldiers than we probably should have, but not wildly more. If you take Defense Headquarters and the supporting services, yes, then it gets bad news. They are grossly overranked. But back to the ranking as such, you need to understand a medium-sized defense force is always going to be overranked compared to a very large one or a very small one. There are some jobs are simply, it's a colonel's post, regardless of whether, or general's post, regardless of whether he's looking after 14 units or 40 units. It'd still be a general's post. In a small force, often they simply don't have some of the functions a medium-sized force will have, so they don't have the people. A small force, for instance, a really small defense force, doesn't have a real acquisitions organization. So that's one of the issues, and it's one of their problems too. Then there is a real benefit to having a surplus of senior personnel in peacetime, particularly those rank groups, colonel and warrant officer. They are your institutional memory. They also reserve when things go wrong and you suddenly have to expand. I would take an example there of the German army between World War I and World War II, where they deliberately educated and trained officers for 2 or 3 ranks above the rank they held. So when they expanded the Wehrmacht dramatically, after Hitler came to power, they had these people who could magically move from company commander to battalion commander almost overnight, and very shortly after that to commanding a regiment, because they'd already been trained to function and think at those levels. That's something we should consider given the size of our defense force and what it might have to do in the future. Okay, that basically wraps this up. If I can come back now to force design. I think we need to be very careful not to assume that just because there's nothing big happening in the region at the moment, military, it never will. You know, not too many of us noticed the insurgency developing in the north of Mozambique. Now we suddenly have Durko saying, oh, South Africa is ready to help Mozambique. Well, really, guys, with what? Sure, the Navy could, with some effort, but it could close off the Rovuma River mouth for resupply to the guerrillas reasonably effectively, if we give the Navy money to get more ships out to sea and keep them at sea, pay them the actual cost of running it. The Air Force could provide reconnaissance and surveillance if we give them the money to do that. But the Army, I wouldn't want to go in with ground forces there anyway, but if we did, I do not believe the Army has enough infantry to go and do the job. You know, one long-term peacekeeping mission, similar mission, really ties up 4 battalions, because if you do a tighter rotation than 1 in 4, you're damaging training and you're crippling people's family life. You can't do that. We've done it before and we paid the price. The Brits did it for some time. They paid the price. So effectively, it's 4 battalions. If you look at what we need for the border, if you look at the people we already have in the Congo, and if you take into account the fact that most of our units are not up to strength and a lot of our people are not deployable, we don't have the infantry. So if you look at this defense force today, on the budget we have now, and I have a thing I wrote there a while ago, which I could always forward to you if you're interested, sir. Look at the budget we have today. We can look after our borders, our maritime zones, our airspace. We can do that, and we can probably intervene if we have to. For instance, if there's a threat to the Lesotho Highlands water scheme, or if there's a threat to Cahora Bassa, we can do that. We cannot do regional missions, peacekeeping, not on this budget, this defense force. We are short of infantry. The mechanized forces, most of the equipment is aging rather rapidly and is not being maintained well because there's no money. The Navy simply doesn't have enough ships, and the ships it has haven't been refitted, except 1 submarine and 1 frigate. And the frigate only the ship systems, not the combat systems. The Air Force, well, the transport fleet consists of 1963 vintage Hercules and 1943 vintage Dakotas. This is really not a viable transport fleet. And for regional work, the C-130 is anyway too small. It has no maritime aircraft at all. So we have a whole range of gaps there. None of these can be filled without money. And I think, again, Dr. Kanye touched on specifically. Yep, and you touched on yourself, sir. Government funding is going to be constrained for the next few years for very good reasons. I think 2 arguments we should use here. One, it's the Department of Defense, the Defense Force, that has borne the brunt of cuts since 1989 under the previous government. It's time that other government departments came to the party and saved some money and cut back a little bit, particularly those that are simply not performing. We know which those are. 2, we need to understand too that defense, yes, it costs money, but there are some multipliers. People employed in the defense force are actually buying things. They can do things with their money. That employs other people. We lay off 20,000 people, that's just another 20,000 people getting unemployment grant, which doesn't help us. And it applies too, and this will be my final comment, it also applies to the defense industry. If we buy equipment locally, we're employing people and we even have export potential. If we shrink the defense budget much more, or in fact, if we just leave it where it is, we can't buy equipment locally. Local industry will die. Then when we do want to re-equip one day, we're going to import everything and import the support afterwards, which is going to become horribly expensive. So there's a two-way loss on foreign currency. To wrap up, I think the Defense Force is in deep trouble. We all know that. It does pull rabbits out of the head routinely and perform small miracles, which is due entirely to the quality of people we've got in it, not to anybody else. But it's cut into muscle and bone. And really, and this has been touched on by both speakers before me, it really is time for government, and you have to look over government's shoulder on this one, to decide really what do they want the Defense Force to be able to do. Must we be able to do regional work? Or are we just going to look after ourselves in our immediate neighborhood, or not even the immediate neighborhood? Having decided that, then go to the generals and the admirals and say, right, gentlemen, come up with a force design and cost it, and see whether it's affordable. To go on like this, we're trying to be a regional force on a border budget, which is not going to work. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is echo. Thank you very much. Edman. Let me now invite Professor Lindy Henneken back onto the stage to wrap up and possibly lift up the key issues that arise from the discussions. Over to you, Prof. May you please unmute? Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. I think there's been quite a lot of consensus in between my opening presentation in terms of the kind of challenges that the Defence Force faces, and then also suggestions in terms of how some of these can be addressed. And you've really, I think Helmut right at the end, and Moses and myself has hit the key issue here, and that is that what does society and the government want the Defence Force to do? I think only in that point, when that crucial decision is now made, I think as a start here would be for the Defence Force to actually say, this is currently what we are capable of doing, and this is what we cannot do. What do you want us to focus on is the first real issue before one starts looking at personnel cuts and everything that goes with it. One of the points that I raised was internal controls. I do think if one looks at the kind of personnel challenges, there are areas that need to be addressed quite critically, like issues of rank inflation, like issues of supernumerary posts. Those can definitely reduce the personnel budget. But I also want to raise something else, and this is what Helmut has raised before. In a kind of defense force like ours, if one is going to decide that, right, the kind of roles that we're going to, we need basically all we can do is have a rapid reaction force with some expeditionary capacity to deal with threats like insurgencies and emergencies within the region. And of course, we shouldn't be thinking of this just nationally. We should be thinking of these issues in terms of the region and globally, and in terms of GIM operations. But the issue is do we need, is this ratio correct? Because it does seem as if the kind of operations that we need, there is some areas which are going to be more personnel heavy and others not. So that it's a point that has come out quite strongly across all the discussions. The other is the classic Clausewitzian trinity, and that is there needs to be consensus and some real conversations between government, and not just the government, but other government departments, trade and industry, education, as well as defense, in terms of what do they want out of the Defence Force and what can the Defence Force give back to society. So that what does the government want, what can the military do, and what does society need is a big question. It really is, and it relates to a point that has come out in all the discussions, and that relates to the exit mechanisms. It is not fair to recruit youngsters who have a very little life experience, and I've just done a big youth development project here in Saldanha Bay. So I've got quite a good understanding of the youth's mindsets, is to bring the youth into the military from disadvantaged backgrounds and put them back on the street and expect them to reintegrate. It is simply just not acceptable. And here I think that we need to have a closer, and I want to whisper here in the General's ears, that to have closer synergy with trade and industry and the Department of Education to say, look, we need more capacity, we need more soldiers in our Defence Force and in our reserves, but please help us think about how we need to prepare these soldiers for these recruits for a second career. And I think here Helmut raised some critical issues, and I've been thinking along the same lines of having them come into the system for a limited period of time with vocational training and then exiting with a bursary and with trade and industry and Department of Education playing a role to say this is where the skills deficit sits in society and this is where the military can help augment that. So I think those are some of the key issues that sort of came out of the discussions. And clearly there's no simple answers to this, but it's really important, and this is what was in my slide, the most important thing is to start having these conversations, because the military, unfortunately, the civil military gap is so wide that society does not see the value that Defence Force brings. And they need to start marketing what they can do and they can't do. And this needs some broader thinking, out of the box thinking. So that is my sixpence. I hope I've captured everything. But I mean, it's clearly that a wider engagement is necessary on there. I think there is a lot of people out there that are committed to the Defence Force, but have never really, there hasn't been enough conversations between society, politicians and the military.
No, thank you very much, colleagues. Now the issues are on the table for comments and questions. I will thereafter invite the three panelists back to do a 5 minutes each closing remarks. Just before I invite you, colleagues, to say what you want to say, let me acknowledge Major General Anderson, the Chief of the Reserve Force. I also acknowledge Brigadier General, Chairperson of the South African Reserve Force. And there is also General Keith Mokwape, is the Deputy Chairperson of the South African Reserve Force. Those are the three colleagues I omitted acknowledging at the beginning. And I don't know how to manage this. Indeed, the issues appear to be not so easy. And I don't think the solutions to them will be as easy as it were. I now invite the colleagues to make their own colleagues. I'm really grateful to the presentation tonight. You have unpacked the issues that this committee has been grappling with since the beginning of this term. And I recognized Mr. Mare. Mr. Mare, you may talk, your floor is yours, Mr. Mare. Mr. Mare, Kopas Mare.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to the three presentations and to everybody from the SANDF and the department. Outstanding presentations, all three of them. But I must say, with the outstandingness, it's also frightening to hear what we have heard. But Chair, I must compliment you for allowing this and facilitating this, because I think this is the type of interaction that we need. And I think without the generals being here to respond, they only observe. I think this will be much appreciated by them as well, based on my interactions with them. Unfortunate thing is, all these things have been said as absolutely reality that we are facing with. The question is, how do we move forward? All three of them have made reference to over time we do have to do things. The unfortunate thing is, where we sit is an immediate short-term challenge and problem. That is the biggest problem. We know that with a budget, there was a 3 billion rand over provision for cost of employees. We know that we have just received, or the Secretary of Defense has just received the notice from National Treasury that the ceiling has been reduced by another 1.7 billion rand. We know that with the COVID budget, the amendment budget, there was a shortfall of 1.5 billion rand. And we know that with Operation Noklela, only until the end of this month, there was a further 1.5 billion rand. That will obviously all must now be addressed, hopefully to a certain extent, with a medium-term budget policy framework. But that gives us already 7.7 billion rand. And that is not over time, that is immediate. So how do we do it? And my big fear is and I know that the generals has always said, if they get instructed to do something, they don't ask questions, they just do it. And as Helmut has said, they're doing an excellent work, and we are always very appreciative of what they do. However, they steal from Peter to pay Paul, that phrase. And how do we move forward? Because National Treasury has already said to us last week in writing, no more money. So somehow we have to deal with what we have got moving forward. It is kind of a, not an ideal situation. We want a certain force structure and a design, and then fit the budget to that. Unfortunately, now we've got a situation where they have told us, cut, you're not getting anything. So somewhere, we will have to do a hybrid approach and a planning approach of knowing what the budget cut is and looking at what we can achieve. My big question was to myself, and I think it is imperative to look at that going forward. First of all, we sit with SA Army, SA Air Force, Navy, Medical Health Services, and the department. And Helmut has referred to that. Many of these divisions we have inherited from the old SANDF. And I often ask myself the question, we are not in a conventional warfare situation like with the border war, whether justified or not, that was the case. Do we still need all these divisions for our medium-term risk assessment of what we might be facing with and what we have to deal with and do over the short term? We have heard the other day the length and the breadth of our vast maritime borders, land borders, and obviously then we must protect the air as well. What can we do without? Some of these might be nice to be under the circumstances, but an ideal situation, it is a must be. What is our situation with regards to force multipliers? I know the minister has said last week there's about 4 UAVs. I mean, you can't operate a defense force with 4 UAVs with 1 C-130 and with no maritime capabilities, and then the helicopter squadrons also under pressure. How do we deal, and what is the recommendations of how do we deal with the immediate short-term challenges, and how do we move forward dealing that over a medium term and long term. And I know this is probably much to ask at the moment, but somehow we have to be not only a devil's advocate, but absolutely realistic with these things that we are facing with and how we can move forward. Yes, budget is always a situation, and they are vastly underfunded in terms of the defense force that we've got. But how do we deal? And I would very much appreciate if there are ideas of us moving forward. I know it will not be resolved tonight, but there's going to be follow-up sessions for us and interactions and learning from others, maybe who has already been through operations and exercises like this. Maybe there are things that we can learn and that we can take forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray. Any other member who I don't see? Okay, Mr. Ryder, over to you, sir. Honorable Ryder.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And yes, I would also like to greatly appreciate the presentations and the initiative from the joint chairs and the committee, because frankly, it's information like this that empowers us as MPs to do our oversight role and have a look at it. And having said that, I think that perhaps the discussion that we're having here today is a discussion that we shouldn't be having, that other people should be having. And I think the professor indicated that comment towards the end, saying that this is a much bigger discussion that needs to incorporate the executive as well as the armed forces. And we actually need to work out what we want to be, because you can't be all things to all people, and certainly not with a finite wallet. So the situation is obviously the unfunded mandates have been much spoken about. The fact that the military is consistently drawn into issues that they haven't necessarily budgeted for, and then we're playing catch up. Mr. Murray indicated some of the numbers around that. And the fact that our maintenance and our equipment is what takes the hit on that. You know, we all remember the presentation from the Air Force and the Navy last year. We each were asking, you know, we just need R1 billion to do absolutely essential maintenance. Well, they weren't given that, and yet we sit with a situation where we're sitting with an unfunded organogram. 3 billion rand per annum that is unfunded, and the situation is that it was reported yesterday. The Defence Force is saying, look, we need 77,000 people. We've only got 73,000, but we need 77,000. And Treasury is saying, no, guys, you can't have it. You've got 3 billion rand too much already. So, you know, sort yourselves out. And I think this is the big issue is we need to work out what the Defence Force is going to be doing going forward. I note very well Dr. Kanyile's statistics or recommendation around a 4-to-1 support to combat split, and remembering as well that for the first time in the 26 years of democracy of this country, we're sitting with a credible military threat in the region, and something that is giving us all kind of, you know, thoughtful moments where we're considering what is our response going to be. So I think that the discussion needs to be held. What does government want the Defence Force to be? And can Treasury afford it? And, you know, there needs to be some sort of a realistic discussion. And we've spoken about this already, Chair. The Minister was on record the other day in front of this committee to say the defence review that we have is the defence review that we're going to be working with for the foreseeable future. So, you know, let's work on that. But the reality is we need to have a sit down and draw up serious, credible ideas of what we need the Defence Force to be, to the people of South Africa and to our region. And then we need to work out, can that be funded, and how can we get that funded going forward? And then we need to take that back to the Defence Force and say, right, guys, this is what we want you to be. This is where you are now. We need to work out the steps. And so the reality is, you know, there were a couple of comments about, you know, it's not a short-term thing. It's not a short-term project. We need to, take a medium-term view or a long-term view. The reality is, step one to any recovery program, and all of the people that have been through drug rehabilitation or alcohol programs will tell you, step one is to admitting the problem. We haven't admitted the problem yet. We're still saying we need 77 or 78,000. We've only got 74. So let's admit the problem and let's work out what we want to be. Where are we going? And once we've done that, then we can start working to solve the problem and make sure that we bring the numbers down to where they need to be, or increase the other numbers to where they need to be, so that we can have a happy meeting in the middle. Thank you very much, Chair. And again, massive appreciation for the presentations.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ryder. Who else? Oh, Honorable Olomisa, General Olomisa.
Thank you, Chairperson and colleagues, and thank you for the good presentation. I think the defense force in this country is here to stay. There's no way that South Africa will be without defense in the foreseeable future. However, what we should be looking at is to look at the implementation of the defense review, but realizing that we cannot do it at once. The Army, for instance, didn't get anything in the defense review of 1998. As a result, they don't have equipment as we speak. Sometimes I get worried when I see these levels of civil disobedience all over the country. And we have witnessed sometimes where the army is requested to work with the police. Imagine one day seeing all these these protests being coordinated in one day or a week. Definitely the defense force would be asked to get involved, but look at their equipment. So we need to phase out the implementation of the defense review, the current one. But we will be led by the report from the Defense Force, which talks to us about the current state of affairs. One, are they ready? State of readiness. Two, what threat is imminent we can face in South Africa today? Somebody mentioned Mozambique, but I think the enemy is going to be around within South Africa, where the people are involved in civil disobedience. So what we need to do as this committee is to recommend to the minister. Yes, we always hear them here talking a lot of stories, but you don't see implementation. I think what we should do now is to request the Department of Defense to submit a memorandum to the cabinet with a view to get a political will from the cabinet. Not this thing of the Defense Force being referred to a subcommittee of the cabinet. You need a full cabinet to discuss what kind of defense force we need and where are we going to get the support. It's unfortunate, it's so worrying when you see the defense force members struggling in this way. But the same government could vote for 500 billion. Guess what is happening? This 500 billion, if at least the defense was given 3 billion out of that, instead it has gone to the thieves. No, something must be done. Submit a memorandum to the cabinet, and then you instruct the minister who always come and tell us all the stories and change the stories. This time around, we want dates. When are you planning? 6 months, a year, this memorandum to the cabinet, and then you come back and give us a feedback. Since 2010, we've been talking about the same thing, or even before. Then there was mutiny, an attempted mutiny in this country. Then we came in and then we came up with a report, but nobody is implementing these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, General. Are there any other comments, colleagues? Colleagues, before I invite the Deputy Minister?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, all right. Yes, Ms. Bukers. It's yourself, Ms. Bukers. Ms. Bukers, and then Mr. Mutle. Ms. Bukers.
And Mr. Mafanya.
And Mr. Mafanya. All right.
Thank you.
All right, in that order. I'll start with you. I'll start with you, Ms. Bukers.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was mostly cut it out, but I just have a comment or observation. I think, Chair, that a society is not seeing defense as a deployment of choice. So what we need to do is to promote or design, but also to popularize defense as a career. And I agree. I think the last speaker that I hear was speaking about this engagement with schools and so forth. But I agree that we must engage with schools and FET colleges, CETAs, to have information sessions for society, especially our youth, to understand that there's a lot of opportunities in defense. We experience it now during lockdown, Chair, that defense and scope skit and whatever are almost, they are in the same breath. When people are speaking about defense, that is about scope skit and whatever. But how or can we modernize defense as a career of choice, starting with progressive programs and community engagement? Or is there a process to modernize defense? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Honorable Mutle.
Yeah, I'll just switch off the camera because of the electricity. I mean, I'm running out of the battery.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And let me take this opportunity to join the chorus and welcome these three presentations. They are indeed very fruitful. They are empowering to the portfolio committee so that when we go to engage with the South African National Defence Force on their perspective, we shall have had the perspective of the academia side. And much appreciation to all the presentation. Chair, I think all this presentation are indicating towards one direction, which is the path that the National Defence Force must then take to have what they term a modernized defence force, which in a nutshell, it's a defence force that will be using technology as we are moving towards that direction and stop relying on troops on the ground, because the future defense force probably will not need as many troops as we have now, but it will have few that have got technological know-how. That's why they were referring to data capture, data analyst, so forth and so on, drone operators, so forth and so on. But the reality of the matter is that, and I want to agree with the general, we've got a serious problem of implementation. Starting from the 1998 Defense Review to the current review, which is the 2015 Defense Review. Little has been done to implement both what those reviews have said. For an example, 1998 Defense Review affirmed affirmed your project like the Woofeister and many others who are still incomplete even today. Now, the 2015 defense review spoke about the arresting the decline, which is still a struggle for the defense force even today. But I agree, probably it will take a political will to actually address these challenges that are faced by the defense force currently. So engagements need to be made, and I think as the portfolio committee, we are doing our part. We are trying to talk and discuss, but unfortunately, the decision that will salvage the defense force will not necessarily come from us as a component of parliament. There is much that needs to be done, probably with the executive and the cabinet itself. And we understand, Chair, as you have correctly put in your opening remarks, that there is a preoccupation with the economy, growing the economy, so forth and so on. But the reality of the matter is that how do you grow the economy, leaving other critical aspects of ensuring that that economy is secured? Your security cluster or your defense to ensure that your borders are secured, both land, air, and to actually cap any illegal activities that might bring down the economy that you seek, you are preoccupied about, that you seek to build. So these are the discussions that we must take on, but we welcome this presentation. They are enlightening us, and they're empowering to us so that we can further engage and debate these matters for the betterment of the South African National Defence Force going forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mutle. Honorable Mafanya.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome the symposium, where it has enlightened quite a lot of us, and then we got a little bit of education out of it. Chair, through you, Chair, I would propose that we have an urgent meeting as a committee where we discuss in detail what we have derived from this symposium. And equally, we have to actually expose the denial of the DOD that we are indeed in a crisis mode. The reality is that some of the elements that have been discussed are not new. Is that it is only that we were grappling to get to the gist of what the problems were. And tonight we have been shown where the deficiencies are. And in some of the presentations that there were areas where we painted a rosy picture that things are still in place. It was only the question of the resources, in particular of the budget. But today's meeting has also exposed that it was not just only budget constraints. It was the future planning that we also had to also come to terms with. So I would appeal to you through you, Chair, that we have a meeting where we are to deliberate thoroughly. We also include the minister so that this matter should also be taken to the executive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mafanya. Colleagues, I think that takes care of. Honorable Shalembe, you wanted to say something?
Chair, Honorable
Yes.
Chair.
Yes. Oh, Honorable Modise.
No, it's Honorable Bartlett.
Oh, yes. Honorable.
Bartlett, I used the raise your hand function.
Yes. Honorable Bartlett. Bartlett,
Yeah.
yeah? Okay,
Yes.
thanks, Bartlett. Thank you so much. My apologies.
Okay. Can I proceed?
Yes, you can proceed.
Yeah. No, I only want clarity on two issues. I don't understand the issue of the ratio. I just want clarity on the ratio issue that they spoke about the 40-30-30. Remember, as a school teacher, when we spoke about the ratio, when they speak about 1:34 or 1:32, another ratio is 40 to 30-30. So then the other thing is they said they are not overstaffed. SANDF are not overstaffed, but they still want to cut 10,000 people. So I'm just worried about our unemployment rate. We can just have clarity on that also. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Right. Now, those were the members of the committee. DM, may I invite you to do a comment? The issues have been laid bare. They range from what is generally known as the constrained fiscal environment and the reduction in the baseline allocations of this department and all other departments. And we're dealing with pressure on compensation of employees, rank and salary inflation. There's been a suggestion of personnel reduction, as part of, facilitating rejuvenation and also dealing with expanded mission and ordered commitments. I think the view there is that the view there is that maybe we can have these what you call deployments on a cost recovery basis. I'm not sure if I'm using a correct term, and but where they are funded separately, as opposed to being subsidized by the current resources. Honorable please mute your mic. Yes, again, we are facing a decline in operational capabilities, and we have noted stagnation. I think it's been mentioned here that there is also a slow case of carrier mobility, and that there is an issue of retention of people no longer fit for purpose, and that there isn't an appropriate exit mechanism. And then the question that we must answer that has been posed: what type of defense force do you want? And again, the issue of the 75,000 members is a matter that has got to be revisited. And I was also excited, happy when the confusion was eliminated, where we sometimes use the term force design and force structure interchangeably. Force design is for the coach having been given all the resources. His is to combine these resources to give us a winning formula. And ours, the minister government, is to give the military the resources that they need. DM, may I now invite you to make your comments? I was just raising these issues so as to allow you to breathe and then come in. Deputy Minister?
I'm unmuted, Chair.
Yes, you're audible, sir.
No, Chairperson, thank you very much. And once again to our academic experts who made inputs this evening for the time they took to make this presentation, these presentations, but also to also appreciate the good presence of our military leadership that is in this mini-symposium. Actually, you put me on the spot because I literally was clear that this is not the ministry's space, that the ministry would possibly later on, because this is not the last time we have this kind of dialogue or meeting, would later on make an input in the discussion in a more considered way, because the experts that have spoken, it would be from the ministries, talking from where I sit in the ministry, it would be interesting to hear what the generals themselves have to say to these views. And with the technical inputs of the generals entertained, the ministry would almost then have a fair appreciation of what is it that we should be considering as our way forward. Having said that, let me just say that the issues are, as the presenters and those who have commented after, the issues are really difficult issues. They are very difficult issues. Let me just make the first point that we all are alive to the fact, and it was very evident from the remarks made, we are all alive to the fact that war is a continuation of politics by other means. So this discussion's starting point is in the realm of politics. It is South Africa today having to decide politically what it wants the country to do for purposes of preserving and promoting the values that the country stands for. And the observation that is lamented here, that the defense function doesn't seem to have adequate support politically in the country. That observation speaks to the point I am making, that we are not going to resolve this matter by ourselves, simply out of the pressures of the responsibility we have been assigned. We are only going to succeed to resolve the problem with the country holistically, because citizens and the leadership and the country's political leadership must have a view that is enabling those who are responsible for the defense function. There are points that were made, in my view, that are very telling and are important, which is that defense organizations, military organizations, are very central organs for influence in global and international affairs. They are vehicles for influence. And when we talk about where the South African National Defense Force capabilities are, we must always discuss that point in the context of the influence that South Africa as a country wants to have, whether we're talking regionally, we're talking continentally, globally, but that is the point that this matter speaks to. And if it's quite possible, South Africans may say, look, you know what, we don't care about what's happening in the region, what's happening globally. We don't want to have influence on what is going on throughout the world. But we ourselves, where we are as a country, are a function of how the world has influenced our own national and domestic issues and got us to where we are. If we say we do not want to have influence about what is happening on the continent and globally, it would be very surprising, because we are people who should appreciate the fact that we are living in a globalized world, and what we consider to be good. If we are saying the democracy we have in South Africa, it's a good way of living and of handling public affairs, but think that we can afford in our own neighborhood, on our own borders, we have people who are struggling and who are faced with all kinds of hardships, and we cannot influence events in those countries such that they live life the way we think our values tells us it is the right way to live life. So what I'm saying is that this issue belongs into that realm. The frustration we have among us who are assigned the responsibility of the sector are not going to be resolved just by what we think we can do. It's the country, it's the citizenry that must actually come to the party, in my view. Having said that, let me also make this point that we have also a real problem that the problems we've pointed to, they all revolve around the extremely low levels of budgets that have been dedicated to the defense function over the last 20 years. A lot of time in the inputs was spent on the human resources side of our challenges. To resolve that problem of a misfit, human resource-wise, that this organization, the South African National Defence Force, is faced with. To resolve it, you need a budget, as Mr. Helmut intimated, and Professor Heineken intimated. You need a budget. You can't. There's no other way of resolving. We can get, like in a very relatively short space of time, the right shape, personnel-wise, for our defense force. But we need money to do that. Because without money, it's got all of these implications, and they limit possibilities of our world. So we do have that problem. These issues, to a very large extent, they speak to money. But furthermore, let me say that a point has been touched upon by Honorable Member Marais, and she's repeatedly gone back to this, which is that we, and of course the inputters also, the presenters, they've touched on it. You see, we need to be bold in repositioning South Africa's defense establishment. We need to be bold to reposition it. And to be bold to reposition it, among other things, it's going to require a very deliberate intervention to address the redesigning of the South African Defence Force for the threats that are emerging on the horizon today. Not to continue sustaining it on the basis of yesterday's threats. We need to, in a very real and serious way, redesign the South African Defence Force with that in mind. There was a point made about the usage of the two, concepts of design of the defense force and the structure of our defense force interchangeably. And that's why I would also want to hear what the generals have to say to this. But from a management point of view, my understanding that when you talk design, you are talking structure and business processes of those structures. What I mean is that the structure of the South African Defence Force, I understand it to be a component or an element of the force design of the South African Defence Force, not the other way around. What is, in my understanding, the overarching issue here is the force design, because the force design speaks to the structure of the Defence Force, but also the process, the business processes of how these structures, Army, Air Force, the Navy, SAMS, how they function in relation to one another and producing and achieving what they are intended to achieve, but even among themselves as organization, who has what powers and what are the processes, what are the protocols within this organization to realize its business. For instance, one of the issues which speaks to force design, which is not a structure but a process, is that today we have joint ops, chief joint operations in South Africa in order to deploy. But someone can raise the point whether is it the only model of utilizing the Defence Force that you can rely on? Do you necessarily have to have joint operations in order for these arms of services to deploy and execute what you want them to execute? All I'm saying is these issues about the design of the South African National Defence Force, they speak to structure, but they also speak to processes of the way the force is functioning. And in my view, we've got to look at the design of the South African Defence Force informed by today's threats. I don't want to go beyond that point, but just to flag these issues broadly, I am happy that the inputs are touching on these, on these aspects. But I think let's treat this as a beginning of an ongoing dialogue that we must have. The generals must come back and also, give us feedback from how they understand, the sentiments expressed here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You are muted.
Chair, you're muted. Chair, you're muted.
Thank you so much, DM. DM was brave to enter the debate of this term, of these two terms, force design and force structure. Really, I was also operating under that understanding that the force design would be informed by your threat and risk analysis as a country. And then from there, you then produce your force structure that will then give you the force levels that are commensurate to the force design. And but we have the chief of the reserve force here and the other generals in the reserve force council, and we also have the generals, the serving generals. I'm not putting them on the spot. I want to say that the views here, the views offered today are not representing the views of the committee or the department. We are just speaking our own views because we are in a workshop, so to speak. So you will not be held against what you say today, but at least it helps us understand the way forward. In the end, I will come back to say what I think we should start looking at as we move forward following from the discussions we've just had this evening. And General Anderson, I see you. You may want to come in.
Chairperson, thank you. Thank you for mentioning my name. I think protocol dictates that I should defer to the Chief of Staff first. If need be, I can come in later, but it would not be appropriate for me to talk at this stage, although I've got strong views. I'll just make one comment. I thought the presentations were excellent, but let me stop at that point and defer to my boss, General Yam. Thank you, Chairperson.
All right. It's just that I did not see his hand. Not that I saw your hand. It's just that you came forward on the screen. Let me just check. General Yam may actually appoint one of the generals or speak himself. Oh, there he is. General, welcome. I see you now on the screen. You may want to say something. Yes, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. No, Chair, especially after the Deputy Minister said something, and the fact that, like the term that was used, fly on the wall. I would prefer not. I would say General Anderson having some views may, but I think it's just good enough for the generals to go on a retreat after this to dissect what has been discussed. The defense, the DRIPT committee has been very much busy with the force design, force structure to put meat on the bone of the results of the defense review. So I would rather not now, but General Anderson may, if you will allow, say.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief of Staff. So, General Anderson, you may then make your own comments.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, General Yam. I align myself with a lot of what was said today. I don't think the issues are debatable. It's the solutions that are the challenge. And the problem is the hole is so deep that we don't have the money to get out of the hole. How would you have exit mechanisms if you can't fund them? And the exit mechanism, everybody says reduce your headcount, implement an exit mechanism, but there's no money forthcoming of any substance. And the risk of putting unemployed soldiers on the street and the morality of putting soldiers on the street who forwent their education in the struggle is a very daunting task. So I think somebody's got to really come up with the exit mechanism. But I'll just, if I may digress, share with you what worries me as a businessman as much as a soldier. There is no affection in this country for the Defence Force. Not that America is a good example, but if a soldier walks into a restaurant in America, he or she will not pay for their meal. Here, we've deployed troops for 5 months, and I don't think the public understands the harsh conditions that these troops are living under and the boredom and the fatigue that is setting in. I haven't seen a single organization say thank you to our troops, and I should include the SAPS in that as well. The veterans organizations are quiet. The business community is quiet. Nobody's saying thank you. That just tells me that we haven't won the hearts and minds of the population yet. I've done a few soundings and people saying, well, those soldiers are lucky to have a job. They're just doing their job. I think they're doing more than their job. I'll close with one last statistic. Just in the reserve force, we've got 14,000 reserves called up as we sit here tonight. 9 of them have lost their lives during this period. A couple by natural causes, but some of the others, vehicle accidents and COVID. But there's no gratitude in this country. So I think the politicians can also help us to shift the minds of the population. We should be proud of our Defence Force and we should support it. And I belong to 2 veterans organizations, and I've taken them to task. I said, why have you said nothing? Why haven't you said thank you? But let me stop. You can see I can get emotional about it. I'm just looking at one small component, but I thought all the issues tonight were well expressed, and they're issues that, as the Deputy Minister and General Yam said, we must take away and digest. Let me assure you, most of them are in various phases of digestion at the Military Command Council and at the Council on Defence. But we need to now come back, I think, having digested them with concrete action plans. Chairperson, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Frozen again. Oh, Chairperson. Chairperson.
Looks like we lost the chairperson.
Oh, Chairperson. Oh.
Is Mr. Chabaleng online as well?
Mutle.
Mr. Mutley, take over.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just.
I nominate Marie.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll take that gap if they
Mr.
don't want to.
I think Mr. Mare, you can take over.
Honorable members, colleagues, let's continue with the meeting. Maybe there's a technical clash with from the chair's side, but we'll continue with the meeting. There's no vacuum. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you,
Yes,
Mute.
yes, you
You
are.
are
Yes.
audible, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll continue with the meeting. In actual fact, we were working towards wrapping up the meeting with the last comment that is made by General Anderson. I think it's only fair to agree with the assertion made by General Yam to say there were observers in this particular seminar, so they that were made, and what with regard to cost design structure. I see the chair is.
Yes, I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Chairperson, both of your devices are on, and both of your devices' microphone is on, so you have to switch one of them off, please.
Let me just do that.
Are you back?
Colleagues, I'm sorry for this.
Chairperson, both of your mics are still on.
I'm trying to come out.
Throw in the dustbin.
All right. I think I'm out now. Yes. Exit. Okay.
Excellent.
No, thanks so much. I'm out. My apologies, colleagues. These things happen. And I wanted just to summarize as that this is an ongoing discussions amongst ourselves as a portfolio committee and with the Department of Defense. And right now, the SANDF, the chief of the SANDF, will be addressing the portfolio committee in about 3-4 weeks' time on the force design. And we'll touch on the force levels. We'll also touch on the issues that we have touched on today. But these are matters that I want them to take away with. There's a view that insisting on 75,000 soldiers is unsustainable, and that we must consider reviewing that position. But only the force design will give us that information. And coupled with that is that we are not asking that people must be thrown out onto the street. That would be very inhumane, unfriendly. But there are other ways of getting to a right size. I don't know what that right size is, but the force design, once all the threats and the risk analysis have been done and the force design produced, it will talk to the right size. But to get to that right size, we must follow a humane process. One of those processes is to ensure that when there's a natural attrition, and we don't fill those posts. And then two, that there are people in excess of the establishment. They are called supernumeraries and in other institutions. And the question is why we retain supernumeraries when we face explosion that starts to compromise operational and capital capabilities. So those are the risks that we must take at some point, and that is biting the bullet, and that we must then look at SANDF not being made to do everything. It's true. We want to see SANDF undertaking some of the activities, but as they do that, maybe there's got to be funding that is put upfront. In other words, those additional commitments must be taken on the basis of pre-funding. In other words, there must be a cost recovery arrangement that is done so that we don't leave the SANDF to undertake those commitments and using the budget, the resources that they have. Because by so doing, you are depleting the resources and frustrating all the initiatives that they may want to engage in to modernize the army. I'm just throwing these things because they came up in the meeting, that when they are together, they're out there preparing for a meeting, they must reflect on those matters. And there was also a talk of setting the budget to zero and zero budgeting. The Minister of Finance has spoken about it. I'm not too sure when last was this exercise undertaken by the department, and perhaps is a matter that should be looked at, check whether it will actually deliver the results that we were looking for. So, and then the last point that you need to look at is I think it was raised human capital management, where some people are placed on long-term leave on pay, suspension with pay, and they're costing millions to the department. There may be reasons why that is happening, but for this length of period, where in some cases they go way beyond even 12 months, I think it's very difficult to understand under the circumstances. In other words, we must look in the areas where if we apply, we become more efficient, would not be making what you call savings. And on the side of the oversight functions, suggestions were made as to how what you call indicators we can adopt that we may use to follow whether the department is, in fact, the department stroke SANDF is actually achieving efficacy, and as it were. I think the suggestion was to look at to consider the structure planning model. Will look into that. So I'm saying, the last point I wanted to talk about is rejuvenation, and the Treasury was very clear that the proposal that is put on the table by the Defense Force as to what, how they want to achieve rejuvenation, it's not going to address the problem that is on the table currently that we're faced with. And I think when you look at your force design and the force levels and the force structure, just look at that as well. And there was an issue of, aging people at junior, soldiers at junior ranks. And is it true and or false? If it is true, how is it this aiding what you call the force? Because the force, you need people who are still fit and healthy. I don't know. I leave that to you. But of course, in the absence of an exit mechanism that gives people a soft landing, it may be difficult to apply some of these things. And there was an issue of rank inflation. Is it true that there is rank inflation? And perhaps we need to look at that just to check if we cannot do something about it. So I felt I should just raise those issues as matters that when we meet again, we'll revisit, because we want to get to the bottom of the problem. We have agreed that HR, human resources, is a major problem for now. And that if it is allowed to go at the level at which it is going, it's going to crowd out all other critical support to all other critical areas in the department. And we don't want to lose the operational and the capital capability that SANDF is known of. And colleagues, I think we will then go back to the panelists, and for them just to do their 5 minutes winding up. And I thought I'd just note these issues as matters that have been raised amongst others that would want the department to ponder on, to reflect on. Right now, there are no views taken, and the purpose was to inform the members of the committee on the matters, and especially getting them from receiving different perspective than we have been receiving so far. Right, colleagues, over to you, and in whatever order, and maybe let's go back to the same order. We'll
And this is that the Defence Force has not done enough to actually market themselves to say what they do beyond defence. We know that the Defence Force plays a critical role in social upliftment within our society, and this is something that they should actually market and point out more clearly. So society actually doesn't know what value the Defence Force is actually adding to the people and to the youngsters, and I can tell you that it's quite substantial. And I do think there needs to be a wider debate beyond this. The debate tonight has been very immediate, addressing an immediate crisis. But whether we like it or not, the Defence Force is standing on the precipice of major organisational transformation, both in terms of its force design and structure. And these issues need to be taken forward because otherwise the Defence Force will not be sustainable and not be able to serve South African society in the way that it can within its current resources. So that's my contribution.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kanye.
Thanks a lot, Chair. My short observations have already been covered largely by your summary, but let me just re-emphasize the following. One, on the issue of the MSDS, this has been in operation for quite a while, and it has addressed so many social issues just by introducing that program, capacitated the SANDF. However, the exit side of it, post SANDF, seems to be posing a little bit of a challenge. I think we might need to refine that so that we don't look like we're throwing them into the wolves, or we are causing social problems. The second issue, Chair, is the emphasis on pre-funding arrangement for ordered commitments. My view is that treasuries might, listen to the department if they make their case quite cogently, just like they did when it came to the reinvestment for deployments, UN deployment, in terms of reinvesting that money within the department. I think a case can be made there, and they might lend a good ear there. The third aspect, the issue of a one force concept, where the regulars and the reserves work hand in hand, complement each other, needs to be reignited and implemented, in order to help alleviate some of these personnel issues. Lastly, Chair, these HR issues cannot be addressed exclusively by cost containment. Well, that's my considered view. We're talking about cost containment one way or another, exit personnel, do this, do that. But maybe we should also look at how can we do capital raising for the department, so that somehow it can become partially self-sustaining through certain projects. The department has vast tracts of land. It has buildings. It has got old equipment that it doesn't use, it doesn't need anymore, which is in demand in our in our neighborhood. All of those things can help raise a little bit of capital, which can be reinvested to alleviate some of these challenges. But other than that, Chair, thanks for the opportunity to share some of the perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanye, for adding to the list of issues that we must not leave hanging, that we must discuss and close so that we can move forward. Thank you so much. Mr. Hetman?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'll just address one question, one point, and then make two general comments. The one question was about that 40-30-30 ratio, and the other, the 10,000 head cut. That ratio is really just a case of if you have 100%, 40% should go on personnel, 30% on operations, 30% on capital. But as I touched on it, it's not realistic. As to cutting 10,000, saying we're not overstaffed, but we can cut 10,000, I don't think we're overstaffed. We have some of the wrong people, like the overage guys, which we get rid of. We can shed 10,000 people, but that will impact on some capabilities and will certainly impact on expansion capability depending who you shed. It's doable, it's not desirable, but it's doable if we really have to. Then there was a remark around technology versus troops on the ground. I agree with the member who raised that. We need to move more towards some technology, but there are some jobs that you can only do with troops on the ground. Now, if we were to say we're focusing only on defense against an attack, an actual attack, then that's primarily a technology thing. Mechanized forces, Air Force, etc. If we're going to do peacekeeping, if we're going to do stabilization, constabulary operations, that's very much people intensive. That's troops, that's medics, that's escorting civilians to work with people in the area, etc. You can't get away from troops there. Then if I may make two comments. One, we have the same problem that the United Kingdom has. Treasury seem to think it's their money. They forget actually they're just part of government. A decision around defense, what sort of defense capability we should have, is a decision that must be taken by the executive, not by Treasury. And Treasury, has in the past spoken with, shall we say, forked tongue. I remember when the special defense packages were on, they assured Minister Modise at the time that because the army was very well equipped at that point in 1998-99, it didn't need new equipment then, that as soon as the aircraft and ships had been paid for, the extra money that was added to the budget, we forget that, it was added to the budget for the SDPs, that wouldn't be taken away but could be used to meet army requirements and some other requirements. And of course that never happened. So I think a point we need to make here is from say to the President, tell Treasury to get out of the way. Cabinet decides how the money is allocated. Sure, there's a certain amount of money. We can't just make more money magically. But it's for Cabinet to decide, not for a Treasury official who perhaps just doesn't like the army. The other one, last one, if I may close with two comments from wiser, cleverer people than I. For background, if we go back to President Mbeki at Davos in 2001, he discussed the Millennium Africa Plan, which later became NEPAD. And he discussed all the nice things that could happen there. And then he said, but there was a precondition. That precondition was, now I'm quoting him here, creating peace, security, and stability and democratic governance, without which it would be impossible to engage in meaningful economic activity. And some people forget that part of it. Mr. Lekota also said one day there will be no development without security. The other person I'd like to quote is the former Tanzanian President Benjamin Mkapa, back in 2003. He made a point which is very relevant to us today. If your neighbor is not stable, you cannot be stable for long. If your neighbor collapses, the fallout will not respect the boundary between you. I think those are some realities that civilians tend to forget and Treasury certainly tends to forget. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. Certainly, this will also help us when we engage with the Treasury as well on these matters. DM, I think your closing remark on this one. All I'm saying is that at least this meeting, this symposium has assisted us in isolating issues for further dialoguing with the department, with the view of trying to deal with the challenges that are facing the department. We remember we are discussing this thing in the context of the current fiscal and constraint environment. Over to you, DM, being the last person.
No, thank you very much, Chair, once again. Really, from my side, there isn't much to say, except really to thank all the participants for their time and their contributions to this dialogue. I actually assumed that the reason why the Joint Standing Committee on Defense was having this symposium was because they got wind, or they were sensitized by the minister that we are almost in terms of time spans due to have a defense review. However, the minister has been very clear in her mind that to go through the entire process of reviewing our defense function may actually be a very cumbersome exercise for two reasons. One, financially, but also just in relation to issues that require speed for us to attend to. And that therefore, this kind of forums, we are going to have more of them so that they can feed into the adjustments to the defense review that we have on the table at the moment. So I am just myself, thankful that a discussion has commenced and it has been kickstarted from the right center, policymakers, so that we can get moving. We need to have amendments to our defense review in order to expedite certain interventions to take place. So it's not just idle talk that we're involved in or because we have the time. No, there is absolute need that we engage in this discussion, and I hope there'll be follow up soon. Otherwise, thank you very much and good night.
Thank you very much, DM. Let me thank you, DM, for accepting the invitation and also participating in the meeting, even though you thought you would be just a fly on the wall. And I think your views are greatly assisting in making us understand the issues better. Let me thank the three presenters, Professor Lindy Hennigan, Dr. Moses Kanye, and Mr. Heitman for the outstanding performance today. And they've exposed matters, not that some of them we did not know, but it's very reassuring to know that what you are talking about is what people, even in the academia, in the academic field, are also talking about. It's just that we have not listened to the people, just the people in general. It's true that they still hold a dim view of a military, but I mean, when they last saw a military going out in their numbers, that was before 1994. And they saw it for the first time now during COVID. And so the military has been misunderstood. It is upon us policymakers and politicians to popularize the defense, like the other colleague said, so that the young people out there see it as the what you call their career of choice. And I also want to thank the presence, the generals for their presence, the serving generals and the retired generals who are here representing various institutions, General Masondo from the Military Ombuds Office, and General Anderson from the Chief of the Reserve Force, and the Chair and the Deputy of the South African Reserve Force Council. Plus, we also invited the Defense Service, the Defense Force Service Commission. I'm sure they were in the meeting also lying very low just to listen to the discussions. I'm very grateful that we had this opportunity, and I think we are now better prepared to engage with the matters with the department and the Chief of the South African Defence Force. With those words, colleagues, is it proper is it right now if I close the meeting?
You may close, Baba.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Just thank you very much from my
Welcome,
side as well to you, the DM, and to the presenters. It was excellent, and I think it's food for thought. It will certainly assist us in going forward. So much appreciated from my side, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also a big thank you to the support team, Pat, Jaya, the committee secretary, Peter Daniels, and Dr. Janse van Rensberg.
Yes,
Right.
yes, absolutely.
No, thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. The meeting stands adjourned. Sebong.
Thank you. Bye-bye.